On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, a year after ISIL's defeat, a victory for Iraq, challenges to recover after the war, and the WTO, a trade system in need of repair, but how?
WTO has a big value for its members.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you on CGTN from Beijing. The ISIL took the world by surprise in 2014 when it swept through northern Iraq. 3 years later, on December the 9th, 2017, the Iraqi military declared it has fully liberated all of Iraq's territory of ISIL terrorist gangs. 1 year on, with ISIL eliminated, Iraq finds itself caught in deadlocked parliamentary politics, hampering the war-torn country's recovery. Everybody had hoped that Iraq would be able to pick up the pieces after the war, but when domestic differences run deep, can there be chance for lasting peace?
Iraq declared victory Saturday in its war against ISIL.
Mosul is the Islamic State's Iraqi capital no more.
The Prime Minister came sounding triumphant.
They're jubilant in Mosul. They've driven the extremists out. But it's come at a price.
A year since their liberation from the Islamic State militant group, Iraqis are still struggling to pick up the pieces. In the south of the country, an economic crisis and lack of basic services such as water and electricity have driven people out onto the streets.
We want reforms in this country. As young people, we are jobless and we don't have anything.
In the north, after 3 years of ferocious fighting, more than 1.8 million Iraqis are still displaced. The people are looking to the parliament elected in May to bring about change, but analysts say progress is slow. No thanks to corruption, political and sectarian conflicts, and a less than peaceful handover of power. The roots of these rifts are decades old, and the new Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Mahdi, appointed in October, has not been able to assemble a cabinet. According to the United Nations, violence has dropped across Iraq. However, sporadic attacks linger. While ISIL has been driven out of the cities, they have made a comeback in remote mountains along the border. In a sign of hope, Mosul's landmark Al-Nuri Mosque, destroyed by an IS militant group, is being rebuilt. The process is slow, but it has begun.
How far has Iraq gone after ISIL defeat? We have with us in our Beijing studio He Wenping, who is a professor from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Baghdad on the phone, we have Ahmed Rashdi, who is the president of the House of Iraqi Expertise Foundation and policy expert scholar on the Iraqi parliament. And in Boston, we have Jim Walsh, senior research fellow of the Security Studies program from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I want to welcome all of you. First of all, Mr. Walsh, 1 year on, is the situation as peaceful as we wish it to be?
Well, there's no doubt there's been improvement. ISIL does not control 1/3 of Iraq's territory. That's certainly a good thing. Has the threat passed and gone away completely? The answer there is no. Certainly there are cities along the Syrian border that still feel threatened by ISIL, and there continue to be the threats posed by individual terror attacks, bombings that might take place in different cities. And I would say this more generally. You know, part of this is the question of security is not how strong your adversary is. It's not whether ISIL is weak or strong. It's how vulnerable you are, how vulnerable Iraq is. And I would say that ISIL's invasion of Iraq reflected in large part the vulnerability of Iraq at the time. The leader, Maliki, had alienated the Sunni constituency. He had undermined the army through favoritism and corruption, and that left Iraq vulnerable because of its own actions. And today, Iraq is in a bit of a political stalemate. And if it's going to be able to protect itself, it's going to have to make progress politically and have good governance. And I would say we are not there yet in Iraq.
Well, Mr. Rushdie, I guess when it comes to what exactly is going on in Iraq, you have the say here. So, Mr. Rushdie, help us to understand your analysis of the latest situation, particularly political stability, and whether there's vacuum in which terrorism would love to seek opportunities from.
Well, still we are seeking as Iraqis the opportunities that it's supposed to be appeared after defeat Daesh. The problem is that there are no clear vision, not from the Iraqi government or from the local government, from the local government that it's supposed to be liberated from Daesh. So we still, as we all know, that we have no things to see exactly how it can be happen in the next, let's say, at least the next 6 months or maybe the next year. Because it's supposed to be that after defeating Daesh, there will be rebuilding of the destroyed areas. And also, the most important thing is that defeating Daesh, it means that also we must defeat the other major problems like corruption, unemployment, and so on. So still, defeating Daesh is a very wide slogan now, but still there's nothing under it as a vision how to rebuild Iraq again.
Right. Ms. He, of course we all understand the reason why terrorism exists. There's vacuum of political power, there is poverty, there is economic challenges that they can penetrate in order to gain more ground worldwide. But obviously from the earlier two scholars, it seems that the problems have not been solved, and there's always the danger that terrorism may come back and reclaim their territory, quote unquote.
Yes, that's certainly. All those dangers are still there. Even though 1 year on seems some situation has been getting improved, but if you look at the picture a little bit bigger, you will see this ISIL now relocated to somewhere else, like moving to the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, and also moving to the Libya, like North Africa, and even some go back to the home country, becoming called a lonely wolf, this kind of individual attack, terror attack. So those terrorist issue, I think, is far from saying, oh, everything's done, everything's okay. So apart from those elements you just mentioned, poverty, like a vacuum of those power, I think also this geopolitical issue, like those countries, the disputes, fighting for power, fighting for their own influence. Some conflicts even can be called, this is like an agent war. This is behind. There are big powers behind. Some those other countries on the front.
If we could just mention some of those, Mr. Walsh, you see the things going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran, certainly, and the United States. Now the Iran nuclear deal is rather trying to scrap off under the current administration. You also see Turkey, Saudi Arabia with the latest journalist tragedy. And you have seen in Yemen, for example, the chaos that is still going on with the U.S. now relatively unwilling to participate. You also have Syria issue as well. So you have surrounding Iraq this very vulnerable area which could all feed the unpredictability and the coming back of terrorism or other extreme forces into the region. Mr. Walsh.
We need to separate two things. One is the role of outside powers or regional powers that interfere in countries' affairs. So obviously Iran has a natural concern about what the future of Iraq will be. You know, they fought that bloody war in the 1980s. So they are present in Iraq. The U.S. is present in Iraq. Saudi Arabia and Qatar now are trying to maneuver a little bit in there. And of course, Iraq, geographically, when you look at a map, what is it next to? It's next to Syria. And Syria, you know, is a mess right now. And it's a mess that could get worse in the coming years as the U.S. is suggesting that it plans to stay and expand its mission. But having said all that, yes, the problem of other players in the region with their own interests makes things more difficult. But at the end of the day, the central issue is whether the Iraqis themselves can get their act together politically. So right now, we have a division between the two Shia parties that won the last election. They are supposed to have appointed a government. It's 6 months, and there's still no interior minister and some of the other crucial cabinet positions. So, yes, the outside players make it worse and more complicated, but at the end of the day, the Iraqi parties, the two parties that won the election, have to find a way to work together, share power, and form a strong government that can provide security and economic reconstruction. That's the single most important thing.
Ms. He, of course, we do not want to debate about the pros and cons of so-called democracy or democratic system, but certainly you do see a premature situation over there for elections to happen and to happen in a way that all parties would accept the final result. So the vulnerability is there, uncertain is there. You see weak governments, both central and local. Ms. He, that means what? Will the Iraqis be able to come together and seek a political solution to the current chaos?
We all know last year when this Kurds in the Iraqi, they want to declare the independence. And then immediately Iraqi central government made a very tough reaction. They sent troops over there and then trying to make those things a failure. Those kind of demanding for the independence of the Kurds. So right now, I think because the Kurds troops has been back off, and then there is some vacuum there. This vacuum either influenced by the Iraqi central government, also neither also controlled by the Kurds military forces. So that's a vacuum of the security. Exactly, that's the thing that those extremists can make their existence there. So this unity, less of the unity of the country, and then intertwined with this insecurity and coming from those extremists, make Iraqi this political consolidarity and also economic development, all those visions. Now it's very hard to push forward in a symmetrical way.
We need to have Mr. Rushdie to comment on this. Of course, Mr. Rushdie, you are based in Baghdad. You are participating politically in this process. You see what's going on around you. What are the reasons? Is there something that can be done in order to make things at least to calm down?
I think we need a strong government. The problem is that we cannot treat something like that because there are so many problems, political, economical, and the most important thing, social also. Because at the end, what happened in the last elections that the boycott was very high. That means Iraqis actually become desperate from the political process, which means that they are not actually wishing that in the next few years there will be some sort of a hope for Iraq. So what actually means is the political parties should be make it together some sort of a vision about Iraq. Let's say Iraq 2030, and work on it, which, and also the most important thing, reducing corruption.
Those are the goals, but how to achieve it, that is the question, isn't it? From your perspective, is there a roadmap, is there a blueprint, and what will be the outside forces, in a way, their impact on the current process in Iraq be?
There is no roadmap. There is no actual roadmap. The Prime Minister has actually tried to make the government for the last 6 months, and there is no hope on that. The most important thing is that we need the help of the international community, we need the help of the regional forces, just to make Iraq more safe first, and secondly, we need our neighbors to make less intervene in our country. And the third thing is that we need to unify especially between Sunni, Shia, and Kurds, in a way to have our own vision. And our own vision, that means Iraq should be unified, should not be separated. And also the most important thing is that we still have the success factors. definitely oil is one of them, which means that we can make some sort of reforms to our economy in a way or another. That means it will make prosperity to the Iraqis. And also, according to this new government, the Prime Minister showed us 20 points that he will try to manage well to see new Iraq. But the problem is that he's so weak is that he cannot make his own cabinet until now.
Okay. Well, Ahmed Rashdi, thank you so much for helping us to understand the situation. Let's go to our two other experts, Mr. Wash. We understand outside forces, for example, coming from the United States, U.S. Started the war in Iraq, and that war lasted for 10 years, if not more. Mr. Wash, the question is now the U.S. is shifting its priority from the Middle East, let's say, to the Asia-Pacific region. And oil is not a priority for U.S. anymore because of shale gas. Back in the United States, you are self-reliant. So not that relevant, some would argue, this region to the U.S. interests. So how to see that you started something, but now it's less relevant?
Well, I think different players would welcome a reduced role of the United States in the Middle East, and God knows the United States has spent a lot of blood and treasure there. My concern is not so much that the U.S. will walk away. My current concern is the U.S. is going to get more deeply involved in Syria, and I think that's a mistake. And I'm also worried that the U.S. is going to be more deeply involved in the Iranian-Saudi rivalry, backing Saudi Arabia, and that could lead to a new war, and I'm worried about that. So I would actually prefer, there's all this talk about the pivot, U.S. pivot to Asia and all that, but it hasn't happened because we keep fighting wars in the Middle East, and frankly, I would welcome the U.S. to have a less of a presence in the Middle East and not be involved in more conflicts. So less Syria, and certainly we don't want another conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That'll hurt everyone.
Ms. He, about that too. I mean, the role of the United States has always been the center of debate in the Middle East, particularly regarding the Iraq war. And now the war ended, and even the war against the terrorism ended, but there's always a vacuum, as we all worry about. So, Ms. He, the role of the United States from your analysis, and also the other players as well.
Well, yes, we have seen a lot of those tragedy and the proxy war in Middle Eastern countries. Actually, to be frankly, I don't think the United States has played a very constructive role in the Middle East. We see the Iraqi war has been done by the U.S., Afghanistan war also has been taken by the U.S., but either of them has been now maintaining a so-called democracy or peaceful like economic development. They're still struggling. They're still in the process fighting very hard for bringing even the peace, not mention the democracy. So even take this Iraqi as a thing, those three, like Sunni, Shia, and the Kurds, easily set them down, saying, all right, all those three groups should have a representative, should be, keep a balance between them. But during the past years, actually, United States also made this kind of trying to keep a balance between this power among those three groups. But when the things goes to on the real ground, and then you find it's very hard to keep that kind of balance. The Iraqi, before the Saddam Hussein has made a very very hard those efforts, trying to use very strong authority and then to unite the country as a whole. But now when you're trying to bring those equality to those three, and then you see some stronger power coming up, like Kurds. They don't want to be, equal with the other two. So that's making it very difficult. Plus, like Iran's influence there, plus now the Syria, the chaos there. So all the countries, they play some hands in other countries' land, territory. So I don't think it's some easy way to get solution right now.
Right. Well, let's talk about the 20 points also Mr. Rashdi earlier illustrated about the current administration in Iraq. Mr. Wash, of course, those are the priorities that the current administration wants to persuade this constituency that they are able to do their job. But now the circumstances obviously does not allow them to, in a way, implement every one of those points. To you, what is the most important thing when it comes to the economy, when it comes to try to reduce poverty, which is the source of why terrorism happened?
Well, I think the two most important things are they find a compromise candidate for the Minister of Internal Security, and then secondly, they have a budget. But you can't have a budget unless you have a government. And because the budget's getting pushed back, the provincial governments don't know how much money they're going to have, and so they can't engage in reconstruction projects. So if you're going to rebuild the economy, then you need to have reconstruction projects, and you can't have reconstruction projects without a budget, and you can't have a budget without a government. Right. So I think the two Shia parties need to end this dispute. The technocratic government under the new prime minister needs to form a cabinet, and then they need to pass a budget so that they can begin spending money to rebuild the economy.
Ms. He, this is happening at a time when, as we say always, the world is experiencing dramatic change these days, geopolitics, and the role of the Middle East in the overall world politics these days. So, Ms. He, some of the priorities that this administration tried to implement, can it happen under the current circumstances?
Yes, the current administration of Iraqi, actually, they have been trying very hard, to have this reconstruction conference and put forward their strategy. They do have. They have those development plan, so saying what kind of projects now they have been planning, trying to get those funding issue coming from those donors, those other big powers globally. But unfortunately, even if I mention, now I cannot help to mention United States' role again, because they have kicked off this war on Iraqi. But when the Iraqi government wants those money for reconstruction, I don't see any very good role now has been played by the United States. They are saying we don't have money. All right, those American company, you can go ahead to join those conference for those money-raising conference, but the government doesn't have. So this is not constructive way. You have the money, like U.S. have the money to increase the budget for the defense, those weapons, upgraded those weapons, but don't have money to rebuild the country. This country has been becoming a mess because of those invasions coming from the U.S. So I think we cannot always blame the Iraqi government, saying, oh, you are not capable, you have been doing things wrong. We also need to think the roots of this war.
All right, before we go, final sentence or two from every one of you. Mr. Walsh.
Well, I just hope that the core theme here is that the internal politics, the two Shia parties have to break the impasse, form a government, pass a budget, and then when there's a real functioning government, it'll be easier to attract outside investment, easier to attract donor aid. So the job one, form a government.
Okay, Ms. He, a sentence or two.
Yeah, I think internal factor and external factor should be combined together, joint hand made. That can make things happening.
All right, He Wenping, Jim Walsh, and also our appreciation earlier to Ahmed Rashdi from Iraq. Thank you so much for being with us. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on the program, the boon and the bane of the WTO, a trade system in need of repair. Answers from people in the know right after this. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. China has been a member of the WTO since December the 11th in 2001. The accession of China was preceded by a lengthy process of negotiations and required significant changes to the Chinese economy. At the time, it signified China's deeper integration into the world economy. 17 years later, things have changed. China is no longer a student of globalization, but rather a firm upholder. And the WTO also needs reform, necessary reform. The world is certainly at a crossroad now. Which direction should we go? Here's a quick peek at the past 17 years.
I turn now to the accession of the People's Republic of China.
A milestone of China's opening up.
So agrees.
When the country joined the World Trade Organization, it promised to bring down tariffs to 10%, achieved in 2010. As China carried on, it has established 11 free trade zones since 2013. More cuts to tariffs followed, with 4.4%, the latest average cited by the Ministry of Commerce, a competitive rate even for developed nations. State-owned companies make up less of the economy, with more than 26% in 2017. The multilateral trading system and its rules, with the WTO at its core, were established through joint consultation based on the goal of maintaining free trade. Since joining, China tied deeply into the global economy and became a big supporter of globalization. However, amid growing global trade tensions, the call for WTO reforms is high, with the support of G20 leaders. Although it may take time and may become more complicated, all members agreed to take the path of improvement.
The past 17 years about the WTO. Earlier, I sat down with ISIL, the Deputy Director General of the WTO. He represented China as a key facilitator in China's WTO accession process, making an important contribution to the negotiations. But now he is serving the World Trade Organization. I asked him the one question he cannot avoid. Is the WTO still relevant today? Mr. Yi, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you.
Is WTO still going to be relevant at all? That's a question many ask these days.
Of course, WTO is the most important multilateral system, and it will continue to be the foundation of world trade. You cannot find any better alternative for WTO. So I don't think you can choose. It's the only thing you can rely on.
But at the same time, some say, why don't we just destroy it and build a new one? Is it possible?
It's very unlikely, or it's impossible to do it, because WTO has a big value for its members. It provided stability and predictability for world trade, and it registered a very good record of anti-protectionism. Let's remember the value of WTO during financial crisis. It prevented its members from competing for raising trade barriers. That's a great contribution.
But the question is, what about now? I mean, WTO now you face several issues, right? You have the appellate body almost collapse next year if there's no new judges. Well, some economies are giving it a hard time. Secondly, you also have even the steel aluminum trade. One trade dispute involving so many nations together. Thirdly, you got a lot of political issues that WTO is not up to this resolve, and yet all pushed to WTO. So what can you do about that? And then?
Well, of course, WTO is about trade. WTO will not be competent to deal with political issues. So you have to seek or recourse to other mechanisms to resolve those political tensions. But when it comes to trade, I think WTO is well equipped to resolve those issues. And we have all instruments and the tools to do it. But the challenge is whether our members are willing to cooperate, whether they want to put their disputes in the framework of WTO. I think that's the challenge. Of course, WTO should be modernized, and the WTO should move forward to keep pace of the times. But that means we need to improve it, not destroy it. I think that's very clear.
Shall I say some of the major economies in the world are having an apparent trade war going on right now, and they drag WTO into it. But the question is, how do you, I mean, with the WTO, be able to work with the economies all over the world to avoid being into a political fight, while at the same time to sharpen the future of the WTO?
We know that some of our largest members are fighting each other. But meanwhile, we believe that the multilateral trading rules are still applicable to those members. And those members still come to WTO to put their disputes to resolve. I think that's a good sign that they still have confidence in WTO. And of course, we need to have a multilateral discussion to address those issues.
Trade and economic ties, Mr. Yi, used to be the so-called stabilizing factor for many bilateral and multilateral relations. And now with the turbulence going on, whether it's trade war or the debate about international governance system, including the WTO, what role will it still be? That is a big question facing, I guess, everyone now. Your thought?
Well, trade continues to be extremely important. And trade reduce the poverty, and the trade help a lot of developing countries to advance, including China. But meanwhile, we want to make trade more inclusive, and we want to make trade more rule-based. So that's why we need WTO as a most important rule-based system to help. And now all members are discussing what we can do to make the rules more efficient, more effective, and more modernized. And that's the issue being discussed by our members.
But Mr. Yi, discussion could take a lot of time, as we all know, and it should be. However, on the other hand, you do see the urgency. On the one hand, you got the trade war going on. On the other hand, people say that is really threatening the potential of the world economy. And we all know if the world economy is going down, that would mean devastating situations for many, particularly from the developing countries. So how do you see this so-called urgency and the procedure?
I think it's a good question. We always say that crisis maybe turn to opportunities. Now is the example we can do. The current crisis of WTO remind our members that we need to do something quickly and urgently. That's why we see in the past few months, our members are discussing what we can do and what should be the priorities. And I think those issues, as you said, it can drag very long, but meanwhile, due to this crisis, members are trying to speed up.
One thing about WTO is it is consensus-based. All your members have to agree to a certain plan before it comes into being. And therefore, that takes time. But that is also the beauty of it, because you have to be inclusive in the rulemaking. But now here's the danger, that you see some of the bilateral, multilateral, and regional trade mechanism being rebuilt with priorities only from certain countries, because the other economies are too small to bargain. Will that waves of change in a way also have an impact on the reform or updating of WTO? That's what a lot of developing countries are asking.
I think those bilateral deals and the regional agreements will have impact on WTO reform. But for me, I think I would say that those bilateral or regional agreements can be a building block for WTO reform. And meanwhile, I think you are right that consensus is difficult to reach. But meanwhile, in WTO, we do have some other format to reach agreement, like we call it information technology agreement, or government procurement agreement. Those are plurilateral agreements, but they will be applied on the most favored nation treatment basis. So that is to say, they will benefit every member, no matter you are a signatory or not. So I think that can be another possible way for some or a group of members to move forward.
Mr. Yi, as you may be very well aware, for international organizations, WTO is only one of those. Many of those international mechanisms is facing one issue, the definition issue. what is developing country, what is developed economy, what is a market economy, what is a non-market economy. And these are coming into this huge debate, and this could drag a long time to go, which is threatening the world economy. So Mr. Yi, how do you see these debates, if not conflicts, involving on the definition in the whole discussion and reform process?
I would say this is a kind of fake issue because you will never find any definition in WTO about developing or developed country or market or non-market economy. I think the key is what kind of commitments you can agree to take in the WTO. For example, I mean, look at Singapore or Hong Kong. They still belong to kind of a group of developing economies, but they committed a lot, more than most of developed countries. They reduced their tariffs to zero, and their economies are very open. So I don't think it's a definition problem. It's an issue how much you can commit yourself to take multilateral responsibilities.
Mr. Yi, some say that we're likely to experience something much worse than what is right now before it gets better. Of course, that's according to some economists. But if we look at the picture, it is not necessarily very optimistic. So from an international platform such as WTO, how do you see your next few steps ahead when you're talking about reform, when you're talking about serving your members, and we are talking about the overall restructuring of the international governance system? Mr. Yi.
Well, in WTO, our members continue to discuss some important issues like old issues, agriculture services, market access, and fishery subsidies, and some new issues, e-commerce, investment facilitation, and domestic regulations of services. I think all those issues should be taken forward, and our members are taking them very seriously. But some issues may go quicker than other issues.
Like what?
Well, it's up to our members to decide. But personally, for example, fishery subsidies, the deadline is next year. So I hope that our members can deliver their commitment to reach agreement by the end of next year.
When we talk about reform and upgrading, there's always the issue of principle. With what principle we are upgrading, with what principle we are reforming, and involve whom, who will be the decision maker. Those are important, particularly if you look at the Asia-Pacific region. A lot of vibrancy going on. Developed and developing countries, emerging economies, all in one. So, to you, how to see that process, principles?
Well, again, I would say that WTO is a member-driven organization. It's up to our members to decide. And meanwhile, we always emphasize that we need to make the process and agreement, any agreement in the future, inclusive. That is to say, big members, small members, and least developed members, they all have say, they all have interest, and they all have ownership. We believe that's the beauty or the merit of multilateral system.
Finally, before we go, Mr. Yi, China is celebrating the 40 years anniversary of reform and opening up. And China certainly was one of those countries after entry into the WTO with the hard work of the Chinese people. Its economy has been taking off in the world. Mr. Yi, if I ask you from the international organization's perspective, how do you see this process of China and the role that China has taken so far? And to proceed into the future, how do you see economies like China's will be able to face up to its challenges? What could be some of the interesting and important principles China could get from international organizations or people who have been working in the international governance system?
Well, I think China benefited from its own opening. And it's also benefited a lot from multilateral trading system. So I would suggest that China continue to commit to multilateralism, to trade liberalization, and to economic reform. And meanwhile, China needs to recognize that China is so big that whatever kind of policies you are going to make, it got to have a kind of spillover effect. So when you establish your own domestic policies, you need to think about the external effect. That will give some comfort to your trading partners, and that will reduce the trade tensions in the future.
And that's what globalization is about as well.
Of course.
Mr. Yi, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your time out of your very busy schedule.
Thank you very much.
Yi Xiaozhun, the Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From Tian Wei and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.